Hey, what's going on, you guys? My name is The Raptor, and it has been quite a while since I posted a video on this channel. Like I said before, things are going to be a bit more sporadic here during this period of death battle uncertainty, although something I have tried to do pretty consistently is interacting with you guys through my community tab. And part of that has been putting up a revolving door of death battle matchup polls asking who would win, each of which are decided by which suggestion in the comments gets the most likes on the previous poll. In a way, these are the matchups that are the most representative of my subscribers because of this, so I figured this could give me an easy way to give my thoughts on a wider variety of matchups that I know a decent amount of my audience is interested in. I'm thinking about maybe making this into a series similar to the ballot banters that Death Battle channel members get access to, might depend on how well this first video does, and it could work in different ways. I could bring on other people for more of an actual discussion at some point, I could grab the matchups from somewhere else entirely, but I think this method does the best job of accounting for the most amount of people at once, so we'll stick with it for now. We're going to begin where all these polls started, which was months ago on the community tab, go over maybe 8 or so matchups per video, and this won't be fully scripted. I'll just be giving my main thoughts on everything as I see fit. And of course, leave your own thoughts on these ideas in the comments, and let me know if you want to see more of these kinds of videos. Alright, let's begin. So the very first matchup was actually something I chose, just so we had something to kick this whole rotation off, and that was Kratos versus Asura, mostly because I felt bad for it, having just lost the Tournament of Champions at the time. However, I also really haven't had the chance to talk about it outside of that context, so I'm more than happy to do so now. I don't think I'm as in love with this matchup as everyone else seems to be. Everyone loses their mind for it, I swear to God, but I still think it goes very, very hard. I've said before that this matchup and Kratos versus Dante I would get like the same amount of hype for if they became actual episodes. However, I will admit that the stuff that really pushes Kratos versus Dante further for me is its status as a legacy matchup and just the fact that it has Dante in it. I really like him and I'm a lot more familiar with him than I am with Asura, but if I push those biases to the side, I do think Kratos versus Asura is probably the better matchup by a decent amount of metrics, although I still really like both matchups, don't get me wrong. But yeah, Kratos versus Asura I feel just goes really hard. It has everything that you need to make a good death battle episode, for the analyses, for the intensity and the spectacle of the animation, oh my god, to even the track, like everything just fits so perfectly for it. There is potential everywhere. And if I want to give any sort of opinion on how I think Death Battle would handle it, I do think that lore or lore scaling would be used for these characters. I know there's some arguments about that, but just based on previous Death Battles and the fact that lore is supposed to tell you how strong a character is and tell you stuff that you wouldn't see in gameplay, which Death Battle has directly acknowledged, I just don't see why they wouldn't look at it that way. I just want to throw my 2 cents out there. But either way, there's going to be arguments. You can feel however you want to feel about it. But yeah, I think this is a great idea, and I think this should be a priority episode if Death Battle does come back, but is under limited time. You know, if they know they don't have that much time left, they should do this one because it's just narrowly lost 2 champion events, and I really like to see it too. Next up, which was the actual first most upvoted matchup, so to speak, is Sans versus the Judge, also from the Tournament of Champions, but lost to Kratos versus Asura in the semifinals. Clearly something else that a lot of people really want. This is a very easy matchup to root for if you just want more indie games on Death Battle, kind of like Bendy versus Cuphead. Like, yeah, obviously there's going to be fans of this matchup who really like the characters or really like the franchises, etc., etc. But if you're also just someone who really wants more indie games on the show, naturally you're going to hop on a bandwagon. You're going to want to root for the stuff that's most likely to happen, and this is definitely one of the more likely indie game fights to happen, and there's nothing wrong with that, you know? So that's totally understandable. I personally don't know that much about the characters. Like, I don't really know anything about Off, and I never got that into Undertale, although obviously I know who Sans is, like who doesn't? But you know, I'm always down for more unique stuff. I've always said that more is always better because you can watch the stuff that you want to watch and avoid the stuff you don't want to watch. So getting more unique stuff, you know, getting a bigger variety of things is always cool. I would definitely be down for this. I've heard some conflicting things about the debate here and there, but this seems to be like one of those who can land the killing blow first situations, just because it seems like both these characters have ways to harm the other. It just might come down to speed or a similar attribute, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that's going to be a recurring element or a recurring theme when it comes to versus debates. That's just the way it goes sometimes. But yeah, overall, I would say Ori versus the Knight is my most wanted indie game fight. That's the bandwagon I've kind of hopped onto, but I have absolutely no issues with this one. As long as they stay true to the series and make something cool, I'd be so down for it. After that, we had King K. Rool versus Blackbeard, a matchup that some people were actually theorizing for season 10 thanks to the Cypher Wheel, but ultimately it has not come to fruition yet. I think I've said this somewhere on the channel before, but I feel like this is such a fun idea. These are two absolute powerhouses of pirates that come from completely different places. There's such an amazing comparison with equally great contrast in my opinion, which give her so much flavor and uniqueness, and just in general, a crossover in a death battle setting between these characters I think would be so enjoyable to experience. Now there are some pretty valid concerns that I've heard regarding this fight before. For one thing, like Kratos versus Asura, there are some disagreements regarding what death battles should or should not include. Giving in my own 2 cents whether or not you agree, I do think death battle would use Donkey Kong feats from Mario content for scaling. It just seems to be more in line with what they've done before, not always, but mostly. Although I could be wrong, maybe they will prioritize the actual Donkey Kong content above the Mario content for Donkey Kong feats, but you know, it'll be up to them ultimately. And I have also heard the complaint that Blackbeard hasn't been in enough fights, and normally I wouldn't really think that this is such a bad thing or like a really big deterrent, but apparently it also could really affect his scaling. Like, there's a good argument to be made that, you know, in a later fight he could get much better scaling than he has now, and if you're a really avid One Piece fan, yeah, I can see, you know, where you're coming from, so I understand that. But regardless of when or if they would get to doing this episode, I just think it could be funny, action-packed, and overall a really good time. That's why I watch Death Battle, so I can't say no to this one. Moving down the list, we get to Hellboy versus Nero, and unlike the other matchups I've looked at so far, this is one that I've talked about quite a bit in some other videos before, including my Most Wanted Death Battle episodes video, so I'll be sure to be a little quicker with this one. I understand why not everyone is super attracted to the idea of this matchup, and I have to admit I am mainly drawn to it for its personality and the series that these characters come from. I really like Hellboy both as a character and the series itself. You've probably already picked up on the fact that I like Devil May Cry as a series and as a concept, so seeing a crossover between these series and these characters, you know, it really meets the needs of my fanboy brain. You know, I can't lie, I just think it would be so much fun and have so much style. And I have heard the argument that it is a little one-sided, and I can see that argument being made for why it's not as good. However, there have been a lot of interpretations regarding this debate to the point where the consensus has even flip-flopped a few times, and it's gone to the point where I'd really like to see what Death Battle would say about it. I'd like to see what they think is most fair to analyze. You know, I don't think that's a bad thing to want. You know, sometimes that's why I want to see Death Battles being made, to see what they have to say about it specifically. And even if it was undeniably one-sided, which again, you could argue that it is, I think everything else has so much going for it. The facts and the analysis writing could get really creative. You know, the quality of animation, especially if it's 3D fight, that could look really good today. Just everything in terms of the production, I think, has a lot of potential. It's not the perfect matchup, I'm not trying to say that it is, and I am personally more drawn to it for the style than the substance, but I do believe that it has enough substance, and I really like the style, so that's ultimately why it's one of my most wanted death battles, but that's just me. Next up, we got Gandalf versus Dumbledore, and this is a matchup that falls into a very divisive category, thematically strong comparisons that are likely painfully obvious in terms of outcome, and not just regular obvious like the last matchup we talked about or many others, but so obvious within the community that you might have to ask yourself whether or not this episode is even worth doing in the first place. Now, to be fair, I don't even think Harry Potter characters are that weak, but they are definitely on the weaker side of magic users specifically, and that's definitely going to apply in a fight like this. Even still though, I'm not sure if this alone would necessarily stop Death Battle from doing it. For one thing, they've done these very obvious one-sided fights before, and in some cases like Omni-Man vs. Homelander have done them amazingly. But also, Death Battle needs to appeal to non-versus debaters. There are going to be some people who really like both series or both characters, but they don't know that much about the versus debate landscape, so they might not have a clue of who wins, but they still want to find out, so they'll still look up, oh, who wins, Gandalf or Dumbledore, you know? So Death Battle still needs to appeal to that demographic, and while it might kind of go against some of the hardcore versus debaters that watch Death Battle, you know, they gotta try to appeal to everybody. So if anything's gonna hold this episode back from happening, I think it would be the J.K. Rowling stuff, but either way, you know, this video is not just talking about how likely an episode is to happen, you know, and it is true to say that, you know, it may not appeal to everyone for the debate reason. Some people may even think that this might not be the best comparison to put these characters in. Some people might prefer to just compare how good of mentors they are, or how skilled they are with the magic they have available to them, etc., instead of just straight who would win in a fight. And I really get that. Personally, I like it when matchups are good as hypotheticals and not just good as death battle productions, but as a death battle production, it could go pretty far. There are a lot of cool visual elements and a lot of lore elements for the analyses. Like, there's a lot of cool stuff that could be there. So if you really like these series and you like the animation more than the debate or anything like that, I could see why you would really, really want it. I just think that its flaws do stand out to me quite a bit, but I will also admit I have seen much worse. So yeah. Following that up, we get to Simone the Digger versus Kyle Rayner, another one of my most wanted matchups that I've talked about a ton already. So again, I'll be sure to make this quick. I love this matchup. It has everything I want as far as epic events and spectacles go. I think the creativity here is unmatched. There is so much creativity you could pull from for both the animation and the analyses, basically all of the production aspects if I'm being honest, but especially, of course, the animation. This could give us epic like we've never seen epic on Death Battle. There was just so much to work with here. I know not everyone likes it, and it was kind of made, I believe, to make a DC character lose, and that's not even really the common consensus anymore, or at least it's not the only consensus, I should say. But even still, I really like the idea of this matchup. I think it works really well as a matchup and as a production. Both Gurren Lagann and the deep DC Lantern stuff would be great to learn about on top of the crazy animation. And if there's one more thing I can say about it, Will of the Drill should be used as the track. I don't know if there'd be any problems with that, but if there wouldn't be, they should definitely just use it. It's amazing. Second to last matchup on today's list is Composite Santa Claus versus Composite Dracula, another pretty big composite idea floating around like Ryu versus Goku. Now, I should say that I do not hate this idea, I definitely don't, but I should also clarify that in general, I'm not really that big into compositing. I really only get excited by that idea or ideas similar to it when it's very obviously the better alternative to the regular version of the fight, kind of like how Xeno Trunks versus Archie Silver is much better than regular Trunks versus regular Silver. That's when I get the most hyped and I get the most interested. Now, this fight does work better as a composite fight, like Composite Santa versus Composite Dracula, but it also stems from the fact that a major connection between the two is just that, how many iterations they have. And that's just kind of meh for me. Like, that's not the kind of connection that gets me the most excited personally. However, even if it doesn't appeal the most to me, I get the appeal. I get why that would be appealing to a lot of people and why that would be interesting to a lot of people. It makes sense, especially since their iterations are so different from each other. There are so many different versions of Santa and so many different versions of Dracula that a composite debate would actually be one of the more interesting ones in my opinion, and it could make for a crazy fight and a crazy script. So if Death Battle did it, I would be up for the ride. There's no doubt about that. It's just not the kind of idea in theory that gets me the most excited personally, but I get the appeal. And to wrap up today's video, I give you the amazing 12th level intelligence idea of the Wall versus Egghead, Marvel versus DC. Yes, there is a DC Egghead. Yes, this was the highest voted matchup at one point. Yes, it's an obvious Humpty Dumpty joke. I wasn't even sure if I was going to include this matchup because it's very obviously not a favorite matchup amongst most of my subscribers or anything like that, but it did make it in fair and square, so it felt wrong to just not include it. If you want me to talk about this matchup in any way unironically, then sure. Even with Marvel versus DC fatigue, there are definitely so many Marvel and DC characters out there that it's hard to run out of ideas. But even if Death Battle was scraping at the absolute bottom of the barrel, I don't think they would ever get to this matchup, despite it just being like a joke fight, like not even including that. Like, these characters are so freaking obscure and there's not that much material to use for them anyway, like for the analyses. And that's actually a genuine concern that I think can pop up for even some unironic Death Battle ideas, where it's like, yeah, the idea might be good, but if there's not enough physical material to use for the analyses or anything, then it might not be that high on the priority list. But kind of going off topic. Anyway, yeah, this is a silly idea. Obviously, this kind of thing can happen through this voting system. There is at least one more joke matchup that I know I would be getting to if we continue this series and continue it like this. But yeah, now this matchup is in your head forever. You're welcome. And that's everything I'm going to dip into today. Again, leave your own thoughts about these matchups in the comments if you want. Tell me what you agree with or disagree with. If you want to see more of this kind of thing on the channel, let me know that too. And if you want to keep up with this rotation of matchups, be sure to follow my community tab. Like, share, subscribe, all of that stuff. But either way, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.